Yes, I think those repeat checks, and it goes back to the point I was making just now, that these companies are incentivised to stop people getting benefits. What we should be doing is incentivising them to get it right, rather than to be harassing people. On Adam Brooks, to a specific point, I see no reason why Adam Brooks should be doing better on that, and I think it's something worth taking up with them. And I just think all providers need to think harder about how they deal with people. It goes beyond disability. There's been too long a culture in public services, I'm afraid, that everyone has to fit around the public service. Actually, the public service should be fitting around people. And Labour's big promise for the future is to have a new approach to the health services, which is centred around the individual. We call it whole person care, and we think it could transform the way the health services work, linked much more closely with local authorities and social care. That's a big issue, probably too long for a 2-minute answer, but please look at it, because I believe it could be the transforming idea for this century, as the NHS was for the last century.
Thank you, Daniel.
I mean, it's a really good issue, Tina, and as I've seen this with my mother in Adam Brooks itself, where her vision may well be different from yours, but trying to navigate for her is extremely difficult, and the signs are pretty confusing anyway. I've also seen similar issues with a number of constituents that I've worked with, where there are particular forms of communication which work better, particular ones which simply don't work. The entire public sector should be listening to how best to communicate with somebody. Do you want things in Braille? Do you want things by electronically? It will depend for different people. It should be easy to find out what you want, not what was most convenient for the public sector. It's one reason why our manifesto as a party is available in a simpler form. It's available in the format that allows you to print out Braille. It's the format that it's also available in large print. You can also have the entire thing read to you if you would like to listen to it as you go to sleep. That's an open opportunity for everybody. One thing I'm quite interested in is something called inclusive design. And actually what we now know is that if you design things that are good for people with disability, they're often very good for everyone else as well. So, for example, kettles with a sort of base were originally designed for people who had arthritis and couldn't put the cord in. Everybody now uses a kettle with a base because it's easier for everybody else as well. And similarly, if we can get the design right, it will help everybody. Another example of that, just very quickly, that I've been pushing on is to get audio as standard on all buses. Now that helps people, I see some people are quite keen on that. That helps people who can't see what's happening. I've tried taking the buses in Cambridge blindfolded, it's quite terrifying. But actually, it helps the rest of us as well if we're not paying attention. So it's one of those things that helps a lot of people. It would be a really, really good thing to see. We should also, by the way, give wheelchairs priority on buses over children's buggies that could be closed up. Exactly.
Thank you, Tina, for your question. All too often, if you have an appointment at the hospital, they send you 2 letters, usually the same letter, but they might arrive a week later. If you're lucky, you get 2 letters. Sometimes you might not get a letter at all. Unfortunately, this system of writing letters has been brought in under the need to provide objective evidence. And actually, it fails patients and it fails clients. So, for example, within the area that I'm most familiar with within law, at the end of a case, you have to write to your client. And quite often, your client might not be able to read, might be moving to another town, and there are issues as to why that client is never going to get that communication, but you have to do it to show the subjective evidence. That's silly, it costs more money. Why can't you just ring a client? Now, obviously, the good law firms, they will ring their client, or they'll tell their client immediately after hearing, this is what happened, are you happy? This is what your next steps are. And we all try to make those differences, but sometimes at a local level, when it's a large organisation managing a large number of people, we find that these failings exist. What I will do is try and bring those failings to the attention of the hospital and say, in your case, someone should have done something by now to make the hospital aware that this is a problem for you. So that's very important. In terms of the DWP and the opportunity for them to provide information in Braille, it's not just in Braille, it might be in a different language, the language that the person is able to read. It might be an audio provision of the content of the letter or their decisions. There's a lot more that we can do, but again, unless these organisations know from you the difficulties that you're facing. They might not change, and it's very sad that you've gone on, I don't know how many letters you've had, or not had, as the case may be, from the hospital, and nobody has been able to bring it effectively to a conclusion of actually they must telephone you to give you that information.
Thank you, Jamali.
No letters are up to state. You can have it in Braille, audio format, or a different language. And when we phoned them up about it, they said they can't do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, someone needs to take them to task on that. It's totally unacceptable.
They put a note on the computer that I do need phoning up to tell me when my appointments are, so they've got no excuse not to do it.
Thank you, Tina. Rupert.
Yes, well, firstly, Tina, it's good to meet you again. I knocked on your door on Sunday. We had a good chat, as you may recall. And you asked me a question in which I wasn't able to answer, and now I can answer it. The Green Party Manifesto is available in Braille, it is available in audio. We can talk more about how you can access that afterwards if you want, but I'm glad to be able to relay that news to you. So, very, very important question, and I think the answers are quite clear here. I think we've already heard much of them. The DWP is outrageous that it's not being inclusive, and similarly for other organisations such as in the NHS. Julian's quite right about inclusive design. I want to suggest to you that perhaps one reason why some of these organisations are not working as well and as inclusively and as humanely as they should do is that they are increasingly subject to managerialist pressures and in some cases to pressures to produce a profit. I was interested to hear in the opening remarks that our chair spread out about Daniel's views, that Daniel, quote, wants to make sure that private companies aren't in charge of NHS services, unquote. But unfortunately that isn't actually true. There is only one party standing at this election that wants to eliminate the private sector from the NHS, and that's the Greens. And my belief, our belief, is very strongly that when you have companies that are making a profit, then it's just not at all clear that it's going to be in their interest to do the best thing, the most humane thing, the most inclusive thing for all of their clients. And we think it's just not acceptable for people to profit out of other people's ill health. So for that reason, we want to keep all of these services thoroughly public, and where the private sector has incurred into them, as it has under the last Labour government and under this government, we want to remove it.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you.
Rupert.
Sorry, I apologise. I know another question from the floor. Can I take, yes, the person at the back?
Hello, I'm visually impaired, and what the question about ATOS is that it's a form, it's a tick box form, and to be quite honest, the people who are sitting there and ticking the boxes, and you go there, what medical, if you've been diagnosed that you're registered blind, you know, and the doctor has told you that, and the surgeon has told you you can't work for any reason whatsoever, and it's just a tick box question, what is the point of it?
Thank you. Can we just have your name, please, sir?
Scadden, Michael.
Hi, Michael. Thank you. Okay. Right. Julian, you're first this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise a really important issue here. And one of the things that I've been arguing in a number of cases, I mean, I've dealt with about 32,000 pieces of casework, and this is probably about the second or third largest collection of things. And one of the things that I've argued is that when a doctor has made a serious diagnosis, that should be enough. Because there are a whole range of conditions which are very, very serious, lifetime conditions, and there is simply no point having a look to see if it will suddenly change. My mother's vision went when she was about 13. It deteriorated very sharply until she was about 17, and then slowly got worse and worse and worse. There is no way it is ever going to get any better. There is little point somebody trying to find out if her eyes have suddenly started magically working again. She'd be delighted if they did. But it's just not going to happen. So we should have a system where, if it is clear-cut like that, where there's a clear diagnosis of something, there's a number of conditions where that would apply, you just skip the whole assessment process, because it's missing the point. But the problem is that far too often, it misses the point, because it doesn't understand what's actually going on in someone's life. Far too often it gets things factually wrong, which means you have to go through the whole process. And I really do think, I mean, the people who do the assessments, I'm sure they set out with the best intentions. My experience has been one of frustration. In one recent case, we had to get to the stage of me sort of pulling all parliamentary rank to allow my assistant to be allowed to take any notes of what was happening, which was really good. I referred earlier to this ludicrous position where a company set up to assess people with disabilities didn't have wheelchair accessible rooms, because who would think that somebody with a disability might occasionally show up in a wheelchair? I mean, what are the odds?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the question. I alluded earlier in the week to last week to the opportunities to train people who are interacting with people with mental health difficulties, and I think that's key. At a local level, implementation of the benefit system has definitely gone haywire, and this is where we need to encourage and to train up people. It's about education, awareness and funding. Those are the key things for making sure the system works as it should. Clearly, Atos, there are difficulties. It's not fit for purpose. Tick box exercises do not treat you as a human being, and that is only by treating people as human beings that we actually get the best results for them and for society. So that's something I would be keen to champion.
Thank you very much. Okay, excellent. Rupert.
Well, you might be able to get my answer to this question from my answer to the previous question. Private companies, their primary responsibility is to their shareholders.
That's right.
Right? That's what they're for. That's what they're instruments to achieve, a profit.
That's right.
So whether it's Atos or Maximus, in the final analysis, you can bet your bottom dollar they're not going to have the best interests of the people they're supposedly serving at heart. We ought to be returning to having a public sector ethos in this country. That's what we've lost far too much of. And we in the Greens would want to bring that back and say, not Atos, not Maximus. Get rid of those and return to it being a proper public service again. Finally, I don't think there are any children in the room, am I right? I'm just going to be a little bit rude and a little bit flippant and say that real problem with Atos, of course, is that they just didn't give Atos.
So just a second, Shamali didn't quite use all her time. She's got another point that she very quickly wants to make.
I was talking earlier with gentlemen about how the Papworth Trust could also work with local organisations. Particularly, we're talking about the station and having access to the station, and people with disabilities who have to ring up 24 hours in advance to Cambridge Railway Station to say, I'm coming to take the train to London. And this is an area where Papworth Trust could offer the training to the staff at the train station, so that they can deal with someone if they turn up and say, right, I want to go to London today. So there is room for other organisations that might not necessarily be under the fixed umbrella of the National Health Service to come in and provide that training.
Thank you. Daniel.
Two very specific answers to your question. I think one of the things which so frustrates so many people is they just don't understand why decisions have been made. And quite clearly, they don't understand them because quite often they're wrong, as the 40% shows. So one of the things that Labour is promising is to be much more transparency in the system. Everyone will get an individual account of exactly why the decision has been made. And I think that's a big, big change and something that would be very welcome. And the second point is, how do we get to this system in the first place? I think it's because disabled people didn't have a voice in designing the system in the first place. So again, Labour is pledging today that all these policies will only ever be discussed in future with people actually at the table at the heart of government. And I hope people like the Papworth Trust will be part of that discussion. Because I think if you were, I don't think we would let it up with a system like this. I don't think we should have to wait 5 years and see all the misery that's been inflicted for people to come around again and say, well, we would do it differently. I think you could have predicted a lot of these problems. And I think if you'd been there, I think you would have made sure it didn't happen.
Thank you. Madam, I know you've been trying to come in for a few moments there.
I can't ask all the questions I wanted to ask. I just wanted to respond to you about saying that about providing training for people around disabilities. Who do you think would pay for that? Because the private companies are not going to want to splash out on external training, or would it be mandated that they had to, in order to be operating, they had to have that training? And secondly, I want to say, sorry, I'm Beth from the Cambridgeshire Alliance for Independent Living. Part of my job, we're commissioned by Cambridgeshire County Council to facilitate their service user engagement for adult social care in the form of their 4 partnership boards, for which we are really struggling to get the members of the Adults Committee to come to, although we're making some progress. But so we talked a bit about making things accessible. That's half of my probably working days are spent contacting people who are asking, coming to us, can you ask your members about this consultation, about what we should do for this strategy and that. And I spend a lot of my time going back to them and say, well, yes, but can we have it in accessible formats? Can we have it in British Sign Language? Can we have it in audio? And by the time that you've got, well, you don't often get many of those, but by the time you do, the time has been eaten into for the consultation periods because they're not long enough to start with, which is probably due to pressures from central government. Targets are set and these things have to be rolled out yesterday. So I'm just wondering what commitments would you make to really, if you're going to do consultation and service user engagement properly, you have to allow enough time to do it and the right formats.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the candidates to keep their answers very short, to try to keep it to a minute, because there's a lot of people who still want to come in with questions.
That's good, that's good. Jamali, would you like to start answering the question again? Let's just go with that. Very quickly on the point of funding, the key issue is that it's a lack of education, a lack of awareness and a lack of funding, and that's something I mentioned earlier. So what I would be looking is to campaign for more funding, more awareness and more education, and it's only through that greater funding that you can be able to provide the training that is so required. And the other part of the question, sorry,
was about consultation periods in order to further engage disabled people and methods of consultation, I think.
It's a great point. I think consultation periods in a variety of areas are far too short, and I've had to deal with this from a planning law perspective as well as a variety of other areas. And it's so important if we are going to move towards a society that embraces everybody, that is a society for all. And I'll just qualify the definition of equality of opportunity because it was wrong. Equality of opportunity would be like a race, but where everyone has a staggered start, depending on the allowances that need to be made. So the person on the inside lane doesn't have an advantage on the person on the outside lane. That's equality of opportunity.
Thank you, Jamali. If I can just remind candidates, please, to keep the answers short. Rupert, please.
But why do we need to have a race at all? I mean, why does all of life have to be a competition? Can't we cooperate a little bit more? I think that both parts of the question are extremely well taken. In the name of keeping things brief, I'll just say something more about the first part, about funding. So Jamali says her priority is more funding. Well, she should tell that to David Cameron then. I mean, it really is extraordinary to hear this kind of thing from the Conservatives. I actually think that the big society was a really good idea, actually. I think it was a really good idea. The problem with it is it was simply used as an excuse to make savage cuts. Whereas to make the big society work, what you actually needed to do was ensure that organisations such as yours and many more were well enough supported so that they could actually unleash the maximum from the population at large and get us all cooperating and doing these things together. So that's the way it should be, not the big society as an excuse for savage cuts, but a real big society which requires the government to actually invest and to end austerity.
Thank you very much. Daniel.
Very good question. I mean, I think with the rail issue, what Labour's saying is that any future franchises, it'll actually be part of the franchise agreement, so it'll actually have to be in there. So the answer is the rail operators will have to pay, and I think that's really important. I think the Papworth Trust have pushed for a number of things, and I think we are responding positively on most of them. On consultations, I mean, this is a big question, and I think it's actually the case that far too often consultations aren't really proper consultations at all. There are predetermined kind of views, and they're often very short, and I think the people from LifeWorks would endorse that. So it actually needs a change of culture from the organisations, but the points you make are very well made, and I think if you can show that it's not been a properly accessible consultation, it's quite legitimate to say, well, you need to start at that point again.
Julian.
I mean, the rail issue itself is a really big one, and I actually. But no, I know, but because I jointly chaired with a Labour and a Conservative MP a group looking at access to public transport. It used to be said in London when this was first considered, people suggesting we should have disabled access for buses. And somebody famously said, there's not much point, you never see any of the disabled people on the bus. Yes, exactly. But to come to your real question, which I think was whether we should extend the consultations so that there's time to reduce all these formats, I don't think that's the right way to look at it. All of those formats should be available from day one of the consultation so that you can start off. That's the way to fix it, and that's something which we would very, very much do. That's why our manifesto is immediately available in all formats. And one thing in it, which I haven't spoken about yet, is to make British Sign Language an official language for this country. Because the people who do British Sign Language do a fantastic job. It is so important. If we don't support British Sign Language, we will be leaving a chunk of people behind. So let's have that as an official language. Let's make sure all of these formats are available. It can be done. It can be done in education. Mayfield School will do it.
Thank you very much.
Is there any budget there to do all these things in all accessible formats? How is it going to be provided?
Thank you. I think that was a point well made. Thank you, Beth. This lady here has been wanting to come in for a while.
Hi, my name's Nikki Myers, and I wanted to ask if you needed the NHS, social care and the Independent Living Fund just to survive, how would you feel given what's happening to those services, and who would you vote for?
Absolutely fascinating question. Thank you very much, Nikki. And Rupert's going to be cursing that he's first.
Oh yeah, I think it's a superb question and very movingly put. Thank you. Well, as I've already implied, the Green Party is the party that is standing at this election in England for saying that what we want to have is not just an NHS that is, quote, free at the point of delivery, but an actual public NHS that funds enough and that is fully public. We kick the private sector out, no more making money off people's ill health. Furthermore, we are in favour of full funding of social care for the elderly, for those who want it. End of. Again, you might say, well, that all sounds rather expensive. The social care would be paid for by some of the things I've already mentioned, some of the tax increases we're prepared to make that the others aren't, and some of the cuts that we're prepared to make, Trident, HS2, etc., which the others aren't. Final really important point though, if you get the NHS right, it doesn't actually need to carry on getting expensive more year after year. Why is it getting more and more expensive year after year? Two of the key reasons are, one, that it's being privatised and that makes it more expensive, not less. And two, that we are not as a nation getting healthier, right? When we have rocketing cancer rates and heart disease rates and mental illness rates, we're not getting healthier. Why are those things rocketing? Because of inequality, because of stress, because of poor levels of cycling and walking, because of poor diet. These are all the things that Green Party policies are designed to address. In a holistic way, you address all those things, and then you actually create a more healthy society. That's what we need to be doing, not just supporting the NHS.
Thank you, Rupert. Daniel.
Well, I don't think you'd be surprised to hear that I'd encourage you to vote Labour in that position. But the reason I'd encourage you to do that is I think just look at the evidence of the past and see which party it is. You've got the T-shirt on, you love the NHS. Well, that's why I'm a Labour politician, because to me the NHS is absolutely my party's values encapsulated in practice. That moving Danny Boyle ceremony at the Olympic opening, it brought the country together, didn't it? And what was it about? It was about the NHS. Now, I think Labour's record under the last government, there were things that I didn't disagree, that I didn't entirely agree with, but overall, it was a massive, massive improvement. Largely due, I have to say, to the hard work of staff. But it's a really, really tough thing to do to keep the NHS working at the kind of level you want. And I think it's really sad that what we're seeing at Addenbrooke's at the moment is a lot of that slipping back. 23,000 people waiting more than 4 hours in A&E. A 1 in 5 chance, if any of us has to go there this afternoon, that we'll wait more than 4 hours. It wasn't like that 5 years ago. So I think you can always predict the future by looking at the past. But the big thing is, there's an argument between the parties about who will spend most on the NHS. I'm glad that's what the argument's about. But I just don't think the Conservative plans are credible. George Osborne was asked 18 times. I mean, I don't blame Jamali for this. I think it's George Osborne who should answer the question. But you can't just say we're going to put money in and not say where it's going to come from. We just don't believe it. And when you look ahead at the cuts they will need to make, some of the leaked documents show they will fall on the benefit system. They'll fall on carers' allowance. I just think look at the evidence. So, in the end, I think you know which party is going to be the party of the NHS.
Thank you, Daniel. Rupert tells me he's got a very quick
Well, just very
5-second
quickly,
comment.
Daniel, you tell us to predict the future by way of the past. Which party was it that privatised Hitchingbrook? Which party was it that brought in the private finance initiative? It was Labour, right? So they're living off their past reputation. Labour are no longer the party of the NHS. Don't be fooled by the spin and the talk.
You allow me to respond to that?
we've got 5 seconds.
5 seconds. Yeah, and look at the outcomes, Rupert. It was much better then. This is not just an argument about ideology. For patients, what matters is what kind of care you get, and that's the test.
The privatised NHS.
Okay.
That's clear.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I would encourage you to vote Conservative, and the reasons are this. David Cameron has kept at his heart and his core the NHS. And why? Because he had a son who was born with cerebral palsy and another underlying condition, which meant that he had to sleep on hospital floors, be there and be at the mercy of very dedicated healthcare professionals. Myself, my mother was a midwife in the National Health Service for 20 years, and I know that if not for my mother's training within the NHS, I wouldn't have made it here today, because I was born at home unexpectedly early and Mum had to do everything herself. Through growing up in an environment where the NHS is considered the envy of the world, I have grown up with the belief that our dedicated healthcare professionals are actually the people that we owe the most debt of gratitude to. We are committed to an NHS that is free at the point of delivery. On this issue of privatisation, I want to clarify a few things very quickly. 5% of the NHS was privatised under Labour. 1% has been privatised under this current coalition government. Ask yourselves, have any of you had any interaction with Macmillan nurses? Now, they provide some excellent care at a very needed time. That is contracted out from the NHS to Macmillan. So there are areas where it can work, there are areas where it has failed. And what we need to do going forward, it's about more funding. Under this government, 12.9 billion has gone into the NHS, the highest any government has ever put into the National Health Service. I'll be very brief on these final three statistics. 9,500 more doctors, 7,000 more nurses in the NHS, 2,200 more midwives. There's a long way to go, but you do need the funding to be able to do it. And that is about balancing the books and having a fair taxation system.
And I'm very conscious there are still lots of other people that want to come in. Julian, 5 seconds.
Yeah, the entirety of the NHS in 5 seconds. I mean, the NHS is one of our greatest institutions. It was a Liberal idea, Lord Beveridge. It was implemented by the Labour government. You know, we're both very, very proud of that. And I've been very proud of the NHS. I haven't agreed with everything this government's done on it, but I also haven't agreed with everything the last government did on it. Rupert was right to point out the privatisation, the PFI, things like Hinchingbrook. And now we're in a position where the Chief Executive of NHS England has said that by 2020 you have to have £8 billion extra as a bare minimum for the NHS to keep going. Now my view is that our job as politicians isn't to squabble about it, but to find that money for our NHS. Now, Labour have said they won't do it. Andy Burnham was very, very clear to this morning.
Very clear on the radio this morning, Daniel.
And you know, I don't think you can conjure up. We can conjure up. So Andy Burnham's been very clear that they'll put in £2.5 billion rather than the full £8 billion that's needed. He's defended why he doesn't think the £8 billion is needed time and time again. The Tories, as we've heard already, 18 times George Osborne had no idea how to come up with it. We've come up with a package which involves some tax rises on wealthier people, closing loopholes, because we have to have that money. And politicians shouldn't fiddle with it, other than to make sure mental health gets in there, which is one of the few exceptions I'd make. We also have to link health with social care much, much better. We haven't talked at all about carers. We have to support carers who do an amazing job. We should provide some support for them, make sure the NHS recognises carers. We have a package about carers as well. And I've worked to make sure we have intermediate wards and a range of other things I'm being looked at. The last two things I would say, nobody has yet mentioned the Independent Living Fund. And our manifesto has an absolute commitment to say that we would want to see a proper replacement for the ILF because it is so desperately needed, so why we've written it in there. So in terms of how to vote, I've done we might not think it's an unbiased assessment, but from my perspective I'd say vote for me and the Lib Dems. But, you know, you may think that's biased.
Thank you, Julian, and apologies for that.
Okay.
Shivani, you wanted to very quickly come back on a very precise point. You really do have 5 seconds, I'm going to stop you.
In terms of funding, how are we going to achieve it? We've pledged 2.2 billion already from the autumn statement by reducing the deficit, and the further 8 billion that's required is through increasing taxes through the number of jobs people are taking on, and also 760,000 new businesses that started up under this government. So it's more through taxation, and thank you very much. There's a gentleman at the back who's been looking to come in for a long time. Gentleman in the striped shirt.
So, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. I'm James from Voiceability Speak Out Council, which, for those of you who don't know, is the consultative forum for people with learning disabilities and autism across Cambridgeshire. We've got an issue that we brought from our drop-ins, which include in Cambridge City, on behalf of the 3 Speak Out leaders who are with me today but have asked me to ask the question on their behalf. But I think Russell is going to help me. Russell, do you want to tell everybody what your position is? So Russell is our representative in Cambridgeshire for people with high support needs. And can you remember what we were going to ask a question about? Did everybody hear that?
Was that hate crime? Sorry,
Yes.
James.
So the question is, disability hate crime is known to be highly underreported. Why do you think this is, and what can we do about it?
Thank you both very much. Thank you, Russell, and thank you, James. Daniel, you're first. Would you like to keep the question, hate crime, and why, and what would you do about it?
Absolutely, I can be very brief on this because I've already mentioned it. Labour will specifically legislate to strengthen the laws on disability hate crime. So it's a clear pledge in the manifesto today. We will do it.
Thank you very much. Julian.
Yes, I mean, firstly, it's good to see you all here, and it's been an honour to have the chance to go and speak to you, to hear from you at a whole range of Speak Out Voiceability meetings. So thank you, as ever, for raising it, making sure that I and people like me know a little bit, at least, of what we're talking about. And disability hate crime is disgusting. There is no doubt about it. Why does it happen? Why? I think it's because some people in society don't quite see people with some disabilities as being the same as them. I mean, it's wrong. I'm not endorsing that in any way. But I think at heart, that's why it is that people see it as an acceptable thing to do. It's not acceptable. We have to make sure it's not acceptable. And our manifesto is very, very clear. And we will make sure the police record it and take it much more seriously.
Thank you very much. Shimali.
Again, this comes down to a local level of policing as well as what we can do from central government. So at a local level, what I would be looking to do is work with police forces so that we highlight the gap in terms of unreported crimes that are hate crimes against those who are disabled. And at a more fundamental level, at the level of government, one of the things we're trying to do is to make sure that people have the confidence in reporting a crime. I have found through my work that sometimes people think, oh, well, the police aren't going to do anything about it, so why should I bother? Or they report a crime and the person who is persecuting them in the first instance takes umbrage to the fact that they've reported a crime against them, and it gets worse and worse. So we need to protect people in society properly, particularly those who are vulnerable, and I believe that would be the way forward.
Thank you.
Well, I think fellow panellists have more or less covered the answer to this question. I'll only add that I think as well as legislation, there's a cultural shift that still needs to be had here. I think we're still facing a society which has some taboos in this area, where there is still some prejudice in this area. I think the prejudice in this area has not diminished as much as it has in relation to some other areas, such as, for example, in relation to sexism and even homophobia. So I think that there's an ongoing work of outreach, of public education, of cultural shift. I don't think we can leave this all up to education. We need to make, to legislation. I think that we need to make sure that in our day-to-day lives and in the way that we present role models and all sorts of things like this, we keep trying to push the boundaries to make disability of various kinds, learning disabilities, developmental disabilities, etc., no longer seem to be something that can't be talked about or that isn't somehow, in some way, somehow something which can be made fun of or looked down of. I think we can do it.
Thank you. I'm going to take a final question from the floor, and then I'm going to allow the candidates an opportunity to...
Can I just ask a related question?
Please.
Related to disability hate crime, how much...
So would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's MJ Black, and related to disability hate crime, I would like to ask how much do the panel think that language and our use of language has a detrimental effect towards disabled people? And if you were to become our MP and I came to you and said, I don't like your language, I think that's unacceptable, what would you do about it?
I think that's a really, really interesting question. Thank you very much, MJ. Julian, first.
Well, I agree. Language can be used in incredibly bad ways. I hope I've corrected myself every time you've told me off. And I hope I don't make too many errors. Obviously, if you came to me, I mean, you know, we have spoken on quite a number of occasions, and I'm sure, firstly, that you would tell me if I made a mistake. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. And I am also sure that I would do my very best to make sure I don't make the same mistake again. It is a huge, huge problem, because the way we do talk about people does say something about how we think about people.
Thank you very much. Right.
Thank you very much for that question. I think the issue of language is one that is so important, and it's important from a variety of perspectives. We've seen in the last week how words can be distorted, how people can infer words that other people have never even said, and that is very unfortunate. So yes, I take on board the idea that you should go to your representative and be able to talk to them about the language that they use. That's fundamental to having a truly representative democracy, and it's a very important point. Thank you very much for raising it.
Thank you very much. Rupert.
Yeah, well, again, I'm comfortable with what the previous two panellists have just said. This is something important. I think I'd just like to add that this begins, I think, relatively early in life. I would like us to be thinking about and looking at how we can find ways of encouraging and helping children not to form, if you will, bad habits in this regard, which I think then persist and develop later in life. I think that's a time when it's when this is challenging for people, but I think it's the most important time because that's when some of this stuff gets set in. So let's work across not just the community of adults and politicians, but across the whole of our community, starting with children, to try to ensure that ways that we have of talking about each other are not hurtful. And that seems to be a reasonable demand that everyone could try and work with.
Thank you, Rupert.
Sorry, can I just butt in there? So, if you were my MP and I came to you and said, you use a specific word that I don't think is appropriate, how would you react?
Yeah, well, I can give you a real-life example. A couple of months ago, I think, 3 months ago, I called some climate change deniers on Twitter morons, and I was then picked up on that by people suggesting that the term moron could be offensive, which, in all honesty, I hadn't realised. And
your reaction to that was?
Well, there was a back and forth, and after a while, I apologised and said, yeah.
Because I was one of the people that picked you up on that.
Oh, right, okay, well, good to meet you. I don't know, sorry if you missed my...
Can I take this as an apology that you should not be using that word because I find it offensive?
Well, I'm sorry if you missed my apology on Twitter. I did an apology on Twitter and tried to make a point of making sure that people saw it, but I'm sorry if you missed it.
Thank you.
I think language has been really important for many, many years, hasn't it? And progressive forces have used language to reclaim territory quite often. It's been a powerful thing. And of course it changes over time because that's part of the struggle. So my answer to your question is I would ask you how you want things defined. And I'd say that to every group. And that will be controversial sometimes, and sometimes groups will not necessarily agree with one another. And that's the nature of politics, it's the nature of debate. But I'm very conscious of that, and I think it's quite interesting as you look over the years, the changing terminologies. But these are battles, and politics is about that democratic debate. So my answer to your question is, I think I'll come and ask you quite early on for the right things to be saying, because I think you're quite powerful.
Brilliant. Okay, we are, and very, very quickly we're about to close down the questions. Go on.
What I would like to know is you're all sitting there going on about getting money for this, money for that, money for everything else, especially the NHS and mental health funding and social care. Why are you letting all these big companies like Starbucks and all these other companies who owe our taxman fortune. You'll come after the common person here who goes out and works, and if we don't pay our taxes, they send us a bill and they want it straight off.
Okay,
They want it straight off. But you get all these big people pay 10% of the billions they owe our taxman that would put all this to rest.
Okay.
So I want an
Thank
answer,
you.
please.
Thank you. Okay, a very, very quick 30 seconds answer from each candidate, please. Okay, so the point was about corporate taxes. Shimani.
The tax law statutes need massive simplification. There's 6 volumes. Yeah, 6 volumes. Simplification. There are 6 volumes of tax legislation in this country, and the sheer volume, the sheer number of tax provisions that there are, mean that big businesses who can hire people like tax consultants and tax advisors are able to find the loophole and navigate their way throughout that loophole. I would campaign for a more harmonised taxation system within the European states. I think it's doable. And also I would campaign for simplification of the tax legislation so that people can't hide behind loopholes. When did we start hearing about Starbucks and all these other companies that have been going on for a long time, hiding their taxes? It has been under this government that we have tried to clamp down, and we will go further under this government.
Thank you. Rupert.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the world expert on this, Richard Murphy, lives in the east of England. He's been working with our brilliant MP, Caroline Lucas, in the Green Party, to put forward legislation which would really address this and really stop tax evasion and tax avoidance. The other parties have made some gestures. We want to go a lot further. Richard Murphy was here recently speaking with Cambridge Green Party. His plans are brilliant. I would want to work on implementing them as a priority if I became elected as your MP, because at the moment we totally don't have a level playing field on this. And it really affects small businesses very badly as well, if the large businesses are able to get away with this kind of nonsense. So thank you, absolutely.
Daniel. Please keep them short.
Yeah. I mean, the reason the Conservatives have failed to do what they claimed they were going to do is actually because they're far too close to a lot of these big companies, and the hedge funds fund their party. So they're never going to be able to do it. I think it's really interesting that 10 days ago, Ed Miliband laid out 10 points on what we would do this time. And I'll completely fess up on this. I don't think Labour was nearly tough enough last time. But as you may have noticed, Labour and business have drifted apart a bit over the last few years. And I think we're in a position now where we can actually be really, really tough on this. So, for instance, transparency on some of those overseas dependencies, really, really important. What we're saying to them now is, we're going to make you publish. Now, those kind of things are going to make a difference. So, in answer to your question, yes, we do want to find the money. We do think those big companies should be paying, and we're going to make it happen.
Yeah, but making them publish and making them pay are 2 different things.
Oh, it's a key starting point.
No.
Julian.
Look, it's a great question. I'm amused because only a few days ago, Ed Miliband, who Daniel says is now Reform's character, was pitching for Tory votes, saying he's actually in the middle and he can work with all the Tories. I don't quite know which one it is. But you're right, people have not collected that money. It's been true for decades. There have been loopholes for ages. We've closed some of them under this government. There's a new Google tax to try to deal with some of the companies that dodge like that. There's a bank levy which has collected billions and billions of pounds. I think it's now broken 10 billion. There's stamp duty loopholes closed so people are paying more. There's a lot more, but there's a lot more that we still have to do. I've been working on a tax dodging bill with Oxfam, Christian Aid and many others. And I hope that we can get that passed. It's ready to go, and one of my priorities for the next government will be to do that, to close those loopholes so that we do collect that money. We had a system under Labour who cut capital gains tax, where a banker who could pay a nice accountant paid a lower tax rate than their cleaner. That's not true anymore, but we still have far too much like that.
Thank you. I'm just really conscious of the gentleman at the back who's had his hand up the whole time. Can we have a really quick question from you, please?
How do you get the stable money for me? Just stable money for me. Just stable money. How much you get for the disabled people? Money, disabled money.
I don't think we quite caught that. So.
Disabled money. Yeah.
How can disabled people make money?
How can disabled people make money? Okay.
Yeah, what he's saying is how can people who are unable to work and pushed into work?
So, no, I think actually, let's be really clear. I think what the gentleman asked was how can disabled people make money? So let's stick with the question asked. And Rupert, you're first. Can we keep the answers very, very quickly?
Yeah, so I'll just say one thing, which is that, of course, Many disabled people find ways of working in all sorts of ways, including in companies that are specifically set up to help disabled people work. Some of those companies require public subsidies or other kinds of assistance. Those have been cut over the past few years. It's another example where we in the Green Party think this is plain wrong. Austerity has to stop, and disabled people need to be helped when they're able to and when they want to work in that way. So thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you very much. With the first question, so Daniel, would you like to answer this?
Yes, I would agree with much of what Rufus has just said. Basically, it's changing the attitude of employers in particular and being much more imaginative in how we help support people. And of course, that is a lot of the work that the Papworth Trust do. So I don't think we should have this attitude that people with disabilities somehow can't work, can't make money. But if you want to, we need to be there to help you and support you.
Thank you very much. Julian?
The key thing is what different people want to do. Many people with disabilities want to work, can work, do work. There are people with disabilities in Parliament, not enough. We have a deaf parliamentary candidate I've been working with, for example. Many people with disabilities can do lots of things. Some people with disabilities, it wouldn't be appropriate. Fine. So we should be helping people who want to work, and not forcing people to work who can't work. It's about doing the right thing for the person. That's, by the way, why I'm on the equality of opportunity, not the equality of outcome, because different people want different things to be able to do. So let's make it right for the person.
Thank you very much, Ronnie.
I really like the question. I think it sets a real nice tone going forward. How can disabled people make money? I think all too often we sometimes look at the poverty of ambition in society. People shouldn't, if you're not good at maths at school, well, that's okay, don't worry, you're great at football. I don't subscribe to that. I genuinely want every child to have the benefit of a solid education that gives them the opportunity to access the global jobs market. Whether you're brown, black, white, disabled, whatever difficulty you are facing in life, I want to give you that opportunity. We have heard today, when I came in earlier at the Papworth Trust, I was told about a lady who had not worked for 10 years of her life. And she wanted to work. And it was through the Papworth Trust that she was given the skills to be able to access a job, and now she's gone on to become a life coach. I think every one of us has a talent in society, and I have found that through working with the children with special needs here in Cambridge, that if we can find what that talent is, your life can be so fulfilling, and it is rewarding for the people that help you get there.
Very much. Okay, we're now going to go on to the final wrap-ups. I'm really sorry because I know there's people that have wanted to ask questions, haven't been able to, but time isn't on our side, I'm afraid. So I'm going to give each of the candidates a couple of minutes to wrap up and summarise what they would do for disabled people, their carers and organisations that support disabled people if they were to be elected. Daniel, would you like to go first?
Certainly, and thank you very much for all the questions. It's been a really good discussion this afternoon. Look, in 14, 15 days is a huge choice in this country. And I would just say to people here, people particularly in third sector organisations, can you imagine what 5 more years will be like, given what we've had over the last 5 years? And it will be 5 years. And it's absolutely critical that people concentrate on this. We've all talked about the good things we'd like to do, and I can tell you more about Labour's manifesto. But it will come down to seats like Cambridge. There's only a handful of seats in this country which will determine the outcome. And the truth is, it's either going to be David Cameron or Ed Miliband. And with David Cameron comes a whole range of characters, including Ian Duncan Smith. And that's what you'll be waking up to in 5 days, in 15 days, if Labour doesn't win in Cambridge. So it's really, really important that people concentrate on that. But let me finish on the optimistic note, which is that actually I think Labour's plans to help and work with the disability movement are really quite encouraging. I think the transparency around the system, the fact that you will have a voice at the table at the very top. Most of all, actually, the bedroom tax will go instantly. These are things that are worth voting for. So don't get distracted by the promises that others are making, because actually in most cases they can't be delivered. Most of the things the Liberal Democrats and Greens talk about can only be delivered with a Labour government. And you only get a Labour government if Labour wins in Cambridge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Julian.
I won't comment on that. It's been a really interesting discussion. We've touched on a whole lot of really interesting, really important issues. And over the last 5 years, I've spent my time as the Member of Parliament listening to many of you here in the room, learning from many of you about what we ought to do. And I hope I've been able to show you some of that experience today, understanding some of the issues that there are. If there was one message which to me would resolve so many of these things, it's making disability issues far, far less of a fight. Because currently it is constantly a fight, whether it's a fight to get help for children, fight to get the care that you need, fight to get support for carers, fight to get the health support you need. It's constantly a fight. That is the thing that above everything else we have to try to change. I've talked about some of the policies, we have many more, but ultimately that's what it's about. So whether the issues are visible or invisible, whether they're physical or mental, what I can commit to is that I will continue to listen to you, I'll continue to work with you, and I'll continue to stand up for you. And if that means trying to force a Labour government to do things that are better, I'm quite happy to do that as well.
Thank you very much. Shimali.
Thank you. It's been very informative to meet with several of you today and hear the issues that you have faced during your lifetimes. I think actually the real test for a politician is to be able to lift the debate about disability and about health above political lines. It shouldn't be a political football, and that's the key thing. In Cambridge, we are this city of the brightest minds, with pioneers in science, technology, innovation and research. We have the opportunity in this city to really lead the way in the world. And this is part of my ambition to make Cambridge the global benchmark for a fairer, greener, more sustainable society. It's possible because of who we are, because of Cambridge's recognition on a global platform. We can lead the way in how we should treat people with disabilities. We can only do that if you have a strong advocate for Cambridge. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, what I've been seeking to set out this afternoon in what has been undoubtedly a fascinating and wonderful discussion, thank you for it, is some of the ways in which the Green Party has a unique offer at this election. We're the only party promising to end austerity, to end the cruel discipline of cuts that there have been in the last few years, to end the cuts to good things so that we can pay for good things and not for bad things. The other parties are not willing to challenge the super rich. They're not willing to sacrifice sacred cows such as the Trident nuclear weapon system or HS2. Well, we are. So Jamali's right. Disability, the NHS, these shouldn't be political footballs. But they are. That's the sad reality. They are. And what we have to do is make sure that we end up in the right place on them. Otherwise, as Daniel says, the next few years are going to be grim. There are so many more things we could have spoken about this afternoon. The Greens want to return railways to public ownership. We're the only party that does. We want serious action on dangerous climate change. We want to make the minimum wage into a living wage. But we're out of time. I'll finish by saying this. A long time ago, Cambridge used to be a Conservative seat. Then went Labour. It now has a sitting Lib Dem MP. I used to be in the Lib Dems. I'm thankful I'm not anymore. Daniel tells you you've got to vote Labour, you've got to have a Labour majority government. But we have four-party politics now in this city, and in this country 4 or 5-party politics. If you believe in what I said this afternoon, then please vote for it, because you know what? You're not going to get it any other way.
Thank you. I'd just like to finalise by saying thank you to all of our candidates, and I'd just ask you to give them a round of applause.